those joining us remotely, today's schedule again is what should you expect from entrepreneurship? What do good opportunities come from look like? And what elements do good opportunities address, as well as how do you access an opportunity? So often I hear one of these answers. It has a functioning prototype. It gets investors or funding. It has a good technology. It brings the product to or service to market. So in other words, it's entered the market. In my experience, they are not necessarily any good sign of success. Could be, but they really don't necessarily point to success necessarily. So what should we be looking for? And I guess the first thing I would say is that it solves the market problem. So there's a clear market problem that is being solved by your project. Secondly, it has a group of paying customers that it keeps, ideally, and then it makes profit from those sales, ideally. Now, for some of you, you might say, yeah, but that's once you've brought something into the market. But these days, startups bring products and services into the market at a very early stage, and through that process, you can learn a lot, and that's what investors and also you as a startup owner should be looking for, is to see the evidence of customers and also money coming in. Let's have a quick look at failure, because I think that's also an important conversation to have. It said, depending on the country, that it's somewhere between 50 and 90% of all companies fail within 5 years. So let's explore that a little bit. And I guess what we want to know is what are the common reasons for startup failure? And so we are just going to touch on that. For many of you, you probably were already thinking, oh, it might be a tech problem, or maybe it's financial problem, or maybe something to do with legal failure. But in fact, what we see repeatedly, and this study also found, is that it's a lack of understanding of the market. So that's what product market fit means. A lack of connection with the market and what it needs. Marketing problems, so the ability to communicate the concept clearly to a group of customers or users. And then also team problems are the three major ones. Finance problems, perhaps the fourth major one. But I guess what this means is that the concept is not aligned with a market need, or is not providing something that the customers are willing to pay for. So that's usually the major source of failure, as opposed to tech problems or the operational problems or legal problems. So let's have a brief, because I think it's also good to understand what leads to higher rates of success. So I'm just going to introduce some results of various studies. Many of these come from Scott Shane's book, The Illusions of Entrepreneurship, published in 2008. But some of them are also outside of that. One of the things that you can do to improve your chances of success is to get a team together. The performance of a new business founded by teams is better. Do business planning, which is, I guess, what we're taking you through in this program. By creating a plan for a business, it increases your recognition of opportunities. It opens up opportunities for different sales. It reduces failure rates. It secures capital. It addresses things such as where is our competition coming from, etc. So doing business planning really does help. One of the things you can also do is to try to seek missed customers. And what we mean by that is customers who are currently not consuming because there's no product that they can use, product or service that they can use to satisfy their need or their problem. So look for these missed customers. You can start business-to-business focused enterprises. So in other words, you're selling to business as opposed to selling to consumers. 90% of the fastest growing product companies in the US sell to businesses. And this is one of the things that Amazon does with its web services, which is some of them are their business, selling to business. You could focus on marketing. better performing startups start marketing sooner and understand the role of marketing in building a customer group. You can focus on the finance and the financials. Attention to financial control makes new businesses more likely to survive and grow. And the lack of focus on financials can obviously cause immediate problems to a new startup. Don't compete on price. So anytime that you're thinking that your main value is price, then you better have a really good reason why you can deliver a lower price than your competitors. Try to compete on value rather than price. Keep focused. Better performing startups focus on one offering and one market to start with, rather than doing everything for everybody. Follow a process. Well, I guess that's part of the process that you'll be going through with this program, this training program. Pick a favorable industry with good growth prospects. Industry does matter a lot. Health and education startups have a much higher success rate. So do software development, for example. And then work intensively in your new venture to get to know the industry and to get an entrepreneurial education, which is what you're doing as part of this program. So already by being involved in this program, you are increasing your likelihood of success. You're also getting to meet a broader network of people, which will help you as well. Also answering the question, what sort of a startup do we want to be? I think there's hasn't been enough conversation about this, about your expectations of what you want to create. And these are the sort of growth paths that a micro, small and medium-sized business tend to follow. And they are the majority of businesses in almost every country in the world. Micro, small and medium-sized businesses as opposed to large businesses. But then there's this other type of business, which is innovation-driven enterprise, or a growth enterprise, should I say. Their growth path tends to look a little bit more like this. It goes under the line in terms of revenue because there's a lot more investment that goes into it. But then it's expected to return high growth rates. And you might have heard the expression exponential growth. That's often associated with these type of enterprises. And these are the type of enterprises that attract venture capital and other business angels into the mix. And I would just say, for you, just make a decision as to whether that's the sort of enterprise you want to have. It might be that organic growth is more than enough for you, and moving forward based upon your own profits might be more than enough for what you want to create. It can get you to a very productive medium, even large size enterprise. It just might take some time. Finance can accelerate that, of course, but it can also mean that you burn out very quickly on the money, and you're under pressure under intense pressure to make sales. And if you haven't achieved problem solution fit or product market fit, then it can cause problems. But the next question we're going to go into is, where do good opportunities come from? And I'm just going to talk about this using a video as a starting point. So let's get that started.
For the past 5 years, I've been investigating this question of where good ideas come from. It's a kind of problem I think all of us are intrinsically interested in. We want to be more creative. We want to come up with better ideas. We want our organizations to be more innovative. I've looked at this problem from an environmental perspective. What are the spaces that have historically led to unusual rates of creativity and innovation? And what I've found in all of these systems, there are these recurring patterns that you see again and again that are crucial to creating environments that are unusually innovative. One pattern I call the slow hunch, that breakthrough ideas almost never come in a moment of great insight, in a sudden stroke of inspiration. Most important ideas take a long time to evolve, and they spend a long time dormant in the background. It isn't until the idea has had 2 or 3 years, sometimes 10 or 20 years to mature, that it suddenly becomes accessible to you and useful to you in a certain way. And this is partially because good ideas normally come from the collision between smaller hunches, so that they form something bigger than themselves. So you see a lot in the history of innovation, cases of someone who has half of an idea. There's a great story about the invention of the World Wide Web in Tim Berners-Lee. This is a project that Berners-Lee worked on for 10 years. But when he started, he didn't have a full vision for this new medium he was going to invent. He started working on one project as a side project to help him organize his own data. He scrapped that after a couple of years, and he started working on another thing. And only after about 10 years did the full vision of the World Wide Web come into being. That is, more often than not, how ideas happen. They need time to incubate, and they spend a lot of time in this partial hunch form. The other thing that's important when you think about ideas this way is that when ideas take form in this hunch state, they need to collide with other hunches. Oftentimes, the thing that turns a hunch into a real breakthrough is another hunch that's lurking in somebody else's mind. And you have to figure out a way to create systems that allow those hunches to come together and turn into something bigger than the sum of their parts. That's why, for instance, the coffee house in the age of the Enlightenment, or the Parisian salons of modernism, were such engines of creativity, because they created a space where ideas could mingle and swap and create new forms. When you look at the problem of innovation from this perspective, it sheds a lot of important light on the debate we've been having recently about what the internet is doing to our brains. Are we getting overwhelmed with an always connected, multitasking lifestyle? And is that going to lead to less sophisticated thoughts as we move away from the slower, deeper, contemplative state of reading, for instance? Obviously, I'm a big fan of reading, but I think it's important to remember that the great driver of scientific innovation and technological innovation has been the historic increase in connectivity and our ability to reach out and exchange ideas with other people, and to borrow other people's hunches and combine them with our hunches and turn them into something new. That really has, I think, been, more than anything else, the primary engine of creativity and innovation over the last 600 or 700 years. And so yes, it's true we're more distracted. But what has happened that is really miraculous and marvelous over the last 15 years is that we have so many new ways to connect and so many new ways to reach out and find other people who have that missing piece that will complete the idea we're working on, or to stumble serendipitously across some amazing new piece of information that we can use to build and improve our own ideas. That's the real lesson of where good ideas come from. The chance favors the connected mind.
Okay, I think that video is a really good way of starting this conversation about where good ideas come from. There are three major sources, and I find that this video really underpins all of them, because at some point you're going to have to do some inductive or ideative creative thinking. And I think that provides a really good message to underscore how to stay in that sort of a state. But let's look at the three major sources. The first is around forecasting, so projecting into the future and imagining a future that I guess you foresee. There are a number of different ways in which you might be able to do that. So there are forecasting methods that we can use, and there are sort of trend analysis, which I'll allude to a little bit more. The second one is around problem-centric idea generation, so actually starting with the problem or the need and then building out of that. So in other words, building a solution to address that. And I'll talk about some of the methods there. And then thirdly, the solution-centric idea generation method, which is basically starting with an idea and then working back to work out, okay, what is the customer problem that this solves? So some of those solution-centric idea generation activities include scientific discovery, maybe inspiration, sometimes errors, creativity techniques, things like that. But we'll come back to those. So perhaps with your project, you can already be thinking about which one you have used. Perhaps you've used forecasting combined with okay, well, this is what I think is happening in the future, and these are the problems I see, and we'll need to face and focus on these sort of problems in the future. Or perhaps you just had a problem of your own, or you saw someone else's problem, or perhaps you just had either a scientific discovery or a a specific technology that you thought had potential that you wanted to use, but you still had to find the problem. But we'll talk about that in a moment. What I wanted to talk about, though, is that often there's a conversation about where do you start, and all I'd say is you can start with any of these. It doesn't necessarily, I don't necessarily think there needs to be a preference. Some would say problem-centric idea generation is the place to start. So in other words, starting with the problem and then working out what could be a solution. And some people believe in that very strongly. I believe that that can lead to great incremental innovation ideas. I think some of the solution-centric idea generation can lead to more radical types of innovation. But ultimately, you can start anywhere. And as I said, with the first one, forecasting, in this case, if you're projecting out into the future and imagining what it might look like, then either way, you just need to find both a problem and a solution. So what are the problems that are going to exist in the future, and what are the possible solutions to those problems? If you have a problem, then obviously you're already in the process of wanting to solve that, I would think. But either way, you need to find the solution with a unique value. And then if you're starting with a scientific discovery or a creativity technique or something similar, then you need to find the market with the problem as soon as you possibly can. So I guess that's an introduction to this section. I'm just going to talk a bit about forecasting just quickly. Some of the ways in which we can come up with that. Maybe if I go back to the previous slide, but maybe some of the ways that we can do that, we can use quantitative analysis, crystal ball, for example, which as one concrete example is using supermarket data, looking at what was selling 3 years ago, what is selling currently, and then projecting out and trying to predict what will be needed in the future. So that's an example of a quantitative method you could use. There's qualitative methods such as the Delphi method that you can use to estimate what is going to happen in the future. And that might involve experts bringing together a group of experts who agree on different scenarios. So what might the future look like? And they basically say, yes, 90% this is the scenario that we think is going to happen, 10% this one. You can also look at various trend analysis. I find that can be really useful to look at, and it suggests what might be coming into being or what might be leaving the planet, which again gets you in a different mode of thinking, so you can imagine what we might need going into the future. We're now going to look quickly at what happens when we look at all the different options that we have when we look at a solution focus. So in other words, we have a solution that needs a problem. Now I'm just going to introduce a number of different sources about where these sort of concepts come from. Where do these projects come from? The most common form, perhaps you're thinking maybe customer issues, customer ideas, you might think. Interestingly enough, the most common form of new innovations and innovation projects, most of them come from suppliers and networks, so within the supply chain. So that seems to be overwhelmingly where the most of them come from. Now, I'm going to ask you another question, which is which are the most incremental? Now, just to give you a frame of reference, what I mean by incremental. Incremental is just a small improvement to something that improves its performance. So, for example, think about my coffee mug here. Well, originally the coffee mug didn't have a lid. It now has a lid. Why? Because I want it to last a bit longer and stay warmer. So this is an incremental innovation. I've got a lid now, and they probably fine-tuned this so that I could, instead of taking the lid off every time, I now have a valve so I can just open it. These are all incremental innovations. So in other words, small improvements to something that already exists. So again, back to the question, where do you think most of the most incremental concepts come from? Well, if you said customer ideas, customer issues, or employees, you are right, which I guess leads us to a subsequent question, which is, where do the most radical forms of innovation come from? Now, radical is at the other end of the spectrum compared to incremental. Radical might not be thinking about my coffee. It might be thinking about, how do I hydrate in a better way? It might think about maybe there's an entire system that can be created for me to hydrate during the day in an appropriate way, where my blood sugars are managed by my intake of something, and I have a device that manages that. Now, that's more of a radical innovation. In other words, something that is new in terms of the technology, but also it targets a new, or invites in a new group of customers that didn't exist previously. So I guess that's most radical, and I'm sure most of you will get this answer correct. Where does the most radical form of innovations come from? Well, scientific discovery, overwhelmingly. And I think that's something that you would all understand very well. So what elements do good opportunities possess? There has been a change over the years in terms of the entrepreneurial process. Traditionally, it's looked a little bit like this. You start with the attitude of wanting to do something, you develop an idea. The idea, you then work out if there's an opportunity, develop into a business, maybe look at bring some people in, whether it's resources or team members. You do some planning, capital raising, and then you launch your business into the market. And hopefully aiming for early and later stage growth, things like that. But too often the market doesn't happen until quite late into the process. And it's just what used to happen 20 years ago, when there wasn't really any testing done along the market, on the way to market, and the testing was quite superficial, just market studies that were done. And that's partly why we have a problem with failure rates. So I mentioned previously 50 to 90% within 5 years. And it can also waste a lot of time, a lot of part of your life if you do it like that. So more modern technique is actually an iterative process in which the market is involved all the way through. So whether it's around the insight that you have, I'll talk about that later, the problem that exists, the solution that you're proposing, or the business model, there's now a number of steps that are involved, and I wanted to propose to you just some of the language so that you can get used to that. And the two particular expressions that I'd like you to get used to, the first one is problem solution fit, which is basically, in essence, is your ability to actually document and validate that you have solved the problem for a group of customers or users. And that they have validated that, and they're willing to either pay for it, or they're willing to do something for it as a user. And I'll explain that also a little bit later. Or product market fit, which is a more profound step in the process, in which I guess you're validating that there is a genuine market for this. In other words, you're not just solving a problem for a small group of people, but there's the potential for a larger group which potentially offers a sizable market that's accessible, and that you can, the value of what you're offering is desired. There are subsequent steps such as problem business model fit after that, but I just wanted to focus on these ones, especially at an early stage. I guess my experience tells me overwhelmingly that these are the two milestones to focus on. So problem solution fit and product market fit. I've heard others use other milestones which they speak a lot about, such as customer discovery, or getting investors, or raising finance, or winning a first customer, or getting initial sales. But in my experience, they don't necessarily indicate progress. They might, but my experience has told me that can be a bit misleading sometimes, some of those, because they may or may not indicate something, whereas problem solution fit is actually a validation by a group of people that you have firstly solved the problem, and then secondly that there's that they can't live without your product or service. Customer discovery, you might know the expression, but that's already a bit in that direction. But I find it a bit passive. I find that often involves just speaking to 100 people and getting their feedback. When in fact what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that feedback for the purpose of achieving a validated fit between what you're proposing and what the user or the customer with the problem. So I guess that would be one of the things that I emphasize. I'll give you a moment to read this. So in many respects, you're trying to solve this problem, which you are proposing a solution that is designed to solve this problem. Secondly, also to ensure that you have the right sort of solution. So some of the questions that I'd be looking to ask are like this. Do you know what job your idea is helping the customer do? Have you a clear problem statement? Do you have a clear insight into the problem, sort of like an aha moment? Do you have defined target consumers, customers, or I'll talk about the difference between a customer and a user. Do you already have a clear value proposition, and do you have a plan for researching, testing your ideas? So I think these are the most important questions at this stage.